So, hi everyone. My name is Lisa Alzo, and my presentation today is Passion and Profession 10 Lessons I've Learned as a Genealogist. And I'm really excited to be here to share some of my thoughts with you as your first presenter this morning. I will be joining in the Q&A later. I've turned my camera off right now just so that you can focus on my slides, and but I will be back for the Q&A, so you can save any questions you have and ask them from me later. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background quickly about myself. In addition to the bio that Daniel read, I came into genealogy a different way. I never intended to be a genealogist. I never intended to work in the genealogy profession. My journey started some 30 plus years ago when I was studying for a master's of nonfiction writing, an M.F.A. at the University of Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I wanted to be a nonfiction writer. That's what I was studying to be. And at the time, I had no idea what genealogy was. And so that's why some of you may know my blog, The Accidental Genealogist. That's why I started this blog, because I had no idea, what genealogy was, or that I would ever be able to make a living out of working in the genealogy field. So my journey, started in Pittsburgh. I was reading a book called Out of This Furnace, and that is Out of This Furnace, F-U-R-N-A-C-E. And that was a 1947 novel by Thomas Bell, B-E-L-L. And Thomas Bell wrote a fictionalized version of his family history. He was from generations of Slovak steel workers working in the steel mills of Braddock, Pennsylvania. And Braddock, Pennsylvania was a small town outside of Pittsburgh, and near the town I grew up in a town called Duquesne, Pennsylvania. That's D-U-Q-U-E-S-N-E. And my grandfathers were immigrants, and they were steel workers. So I saw a lot of similarities in Bell's book with my own family. And at the time, I was living at home, and I was talking to my mother about my grandparents and my heritage. And again, no intention of doing genealogy, but like many, I had seen the miniseries Roots, so I knew what it was. But I basically just started asking my mom questions because my grandparents were all deceased. I didn't know my dad's parents. My grandfather died before I was born, and my grandmother died when I was 2. But my mom's parents, I knew my grandfather up until I was age 9. He died at that time. But my grandmother I knew from up until when I was in college, but I never asked her any questions about her life or her immigration story. She didn't speak very good English. I didn't speak Slovak, so we didn't really communicate in that way. And it's my biggest regret, because I had to then rely on my mother and my aunts and uncles and other people to tell me my grandmother's story. So that got me interested in genealogy. And at the same time, I was taking this course on the literature of Pittsburgh, and I needed a topic for my thesis. And I decided that I would write my grandmother's story, because she was a Slovak immigrant woman, and not much had been written about the women at that time. There was a lot about the men, but not a lot about the women. So basically, I wanted to write a female version of Out of This Furnace, but in nonfiction style. So that thesis led me to my first book, 3 Slovak Women, which is now available on Amazon. And it's in its 2nd edition, because as I learned in genealogy, you're never done. And when I started my research, I didn't have things like Ancestry.com or MyHeritage or the Ellis Island database or even the Family Search database. I had access to microfilms, and I had the ability to travel to places and visit where my grandparents had lived, and research in libraries and so forth and courthouses, but I didn't have the internet when I started. And so as I started doing more research and as more records became available, I learned a lot more about my family. And then in 2010, I went to Slovakia and I actually saw my grandmother's village and I actually met people and I had more information about those who came before my grandmother. So, you know, as I said, in genealogy, you're never done. So I put out a second edition of my book, but this all led me to my path. And so one of my first lessons that I want to share with you is that you have to plot your own path. And I think you'll hear four different versions of being a genealogy professional today. Each one of us does different things with our careers. And I think you have to figure out what works for you. And it's okay if you don't know the answer right away. But every journey begins with the first step. So you really just need to, you know, think about, you know, what it is that you like to do, where you find your strengths are, and, you know, what you feel your passion is. And so you just have to take that first step. And, you know, none of us have a crystal ball. And as I said, I had no intention of becoming a genealogist. I started with writing my book. I gained followers, people that liked my book. And then in 2002, I started actually 2001, I started speaking as a genealogist and I presented at the Czechoslovak Genealogical Society in Pittsburgh. And as I began to think about what I had done with my book, I wanted to do more with it. So I queried magazines. I started writing for Family Tree magazine. I started writing for, at that time, it was Family Chronicle. Now that changed into Your Genealogy Today. And now we have Internet Genealogy magazine, and that's all under the same publisher of Moorehead's magazines. And so I started writing for those magazines, and then I started applying to be a genealogy speaker. And so my career kind of just made itself. I was actually working as an editorial assistant at Cornell University, and I had the flexibility in my job that I was allowed to travel to conferences and do this genealogy work part-time. So I just had no idea at that point how it would blossom into more of a profession. And so one of the things that I think it is important to have is to have a vision and, you know, have this overall vision of what you would like to do. And a lot of people like to create vision boards where you know, cut out pictures or you do them digitally and you put, you know, representations, words, pictures, you know, things that will lead you to deeper thought about what you want to do. And so I think having a vision board is a really great idea, whether you do that on your computer or on a whiteboard, you know, just to kind of see where your interests lie and how you can make your path to get there. And so you really want to, you know, create your own life map, and what works for me won't work for somebody else. And so everybody has their own way of proceeding with this life map. And so I just wanted to give you some of my thoughts and my lessons on what worked for me, some of the challenges I faced, and where I am today in my career. So the second thing is that change is inevitable. And in genealogy, it's notoriously a field where people still want to do things the old way. And there's, sometimes there's a bit of a resistance to the new way. And I think those of you who have joined the Hidden Branch and are involved in this effort, I applaud you for all the efforts you are making to get more people interested in the genealogy and also the genealogy field, and for introducing some of us, and I consider myself one of them, old timers, to see things in a new light and to maybe have new ways of communication and presenting and getting information out there and just new strategies. And I really applaud, Daniel and PJ and all the other members of the Hidden Branch for doing this, because I think we need the new blood and we need the new ways. And I think there's a way to blend them both, some of the things that have worked with some of the newer things. And I think in genealogy, as in other fields, we were affected greatly by March 2020, when the pandemic happened, the lockdown, the shutdown. It impacted us in ways we just couldn't even imagine. And so, one of the things I remember is my last presentation in person before the lockdown. And I was at a library in Elmira, New York, doing a presentation, ironically, on immersion genealogy, on traveling to where your ancestors lived and worked and played and worshipped and so forth. And I remember doing that presentation, and then everything shut down. And so we all had to pivot. We all had to learn new ways of doing things, Zoom, like we're doing today, other types of online presentation platforms. How do we keep our careers going when libraries are shut down, archives are shut down? How do we manage that? And I think everybody that works in this field has their own story. And for me, fortunately, I'd been doing online presentations before the pandemic. So moving to Zoom, pivoting over to, online presentations wasn't that difficult for me. And I actually embraced it. I know some of my colleagues really did not care for the online presentation mode. And I could relate to that because you don't have the same interaction as you do with a physical audience. So you don't see necessarily see their facial expressions or really get the feel for the room when you're seeing people's faces on screen. So I understand that, and I empathize with that. For me, I thrived for it because I consider myself a functional introvert, meaning I can get up in front of large audiences, and I have at Roots Tech and NGS and all the other conferences, and present to a large crowd. But I also feel most at home just working at home in the quiet, and I don't like a lot of crowds and noise. And so sometimes, when that overwhelms me, I have to step back from those situations. But because I'm a writer by choice and at heart, I like the solitary work that writing and genealogy research offers. But I do see where some people had a hard time adjusting. And so my point is, you have to embrace the change. We can fight the change, but embracing it is probably, something that you would do well to learn to do if you have a hard time doing that, because we're always going to have change, and technology is feeding that change. And so we just need to be prepared in our careers to do that shift. And so for me, writing, as I said, has been my love for forever. I've, written for many different genealogy magazines, and I still continue to do that, even though we have less writing opportunities than we did when I started. I remember when we had Ancestry magazine and Genealogical Computing and the 3 different genealogy magazines from Moore's Head Publishers. And so a lot has changed just in the the actual opportunities that are out there, but they're still there. There are a lot of online writing opportunities. You really just have to go out and find them. And I spent a lot of time early in my career, connecting with editors, querying, coming up with ideas, novel ideas, new ideas for different articles. And, I have a friend who jokes with me. He says when he goes into Barnes and Noble in Pittsburgh, he picks up a genealogy magazine and he says, inevitably, I know there's going to be an article by Lisa Alzo in there. And so he's half joking, but actually, that's my passion. And I built my career. And so I'm very proud of that. It's not bragging. It's just that I worked very hard to get to where I am today. And that was embracing change and taking opportunities when they presented themselves. So, I like this quote, we are afraid of, we are afraid of not knowing what comes next. And so we make our lives predictable. Don't be afraid of what comes next. You'll be okay. And so I like to, use this as my mantra. And especially in the last 3 years, things have changed in my genealogy business. And it's easy to panic and it's easy to be unsure, but you're going to be okay. I promise you that. And never stop learning. Trust yourself. All things are possible. And yes, I can do this. And I try to think positively. Most of the time, I'm a very positive person, and I always try to find a way to make something happen. And so that leads me to number 3. And I think this is really important, especially for those of you who are presenting or want to write and publish books and publish articles. I really think that creating your own content and being in control of your content is very important. And so they always say content is king. And so you really, when you're thinking this out, what can you do to create on your own? And for me, I found the journey quite challenging sometimes. I started out with a self-published book, but then I went into traditionally published books. So I worked with Family Tree magazine on my Polish, Czech, and Slovak guide. I've worked with Arcadia Publishing for 5 different books. I've worked with what is now the International Institute for Genealogical Studies. I published a book through them. So I've worked with different editors and different types of book platform. And you have to be aware of when you're getting traditional book contracts or magazine contracts, what do you own? Do you own the copyright? Are you free to use that content elsewhere, or are you exclusive? When you present, are you signing a contract that allows that organization to disseminate that information, that presentation, your handout freely to anybody? So you have to really read your contracts, and legal stuff is not my area, but you really do have to be aware of your own content and what you're creating and how much control you keep of your own work. And so that is something that I work very hard to establish my boundaries. And now I'm in the position where I can kind of pick and choose what I want to do, which is not always easy when you're just starting out and trying to make a name for yourself. One of the things I love to do is, come up with ideas. I love doing mind maps and brainstorming and, having different ideas for new book projects, new presentations. And that's one of the things that has helped me to pivot and keep me going and adjust to that change. Number 4 is to be your own cheerleader. And I think this is really important. And it's kind of hard to run that balance of over self-promotion, look how great I am, and under promoting where you're afraid to share your accomplishments. And I kind of fall in the middle somewhere. I don't like to over promote. I like my work to speak for itself most of the time. But on the other hand, the only way to get another book contract or get people to read your books or your articles or attend your presentation is to market yourself and is to get the word out. So I think it's a very fine balance. And, I'm not really one that subscribes to this genealogy rock star persona stuff. I really, I like being in a position where I've reached somebody, and I really appreciate when people reach out to me personally and say, hey, that presentation you did really helped me, or I really enjoyed your article, or you did a great job, or I love your book. And that was one of the biggest things for me, is when I wrote Three Slovak Women, it was mostly for my family, but I wanted to do something that was universal for the Slavic immigrant woman. And when people would write to me and say, if you take away the names, dates, and places and substitute mine, that could be the story of my family. And my book has been purchased from people, by people throughout the world. And, when I get those compliments, that's what really fuels me. So, I think it's a fine balance to really believe in yourself and be confident, but not come off as, too confident, or where people kind of get tired of you. So, there's a very fine balance, and I believe in that. And to be creative, you must break away from what is expected, essentially competing with what has come before so that you can create something new. And this is a quote from author Jeff Goins, who wrote this book called Real Artists Don't Starve. And I really liked that book. And I consider myself a creator of, ideas and presentations and new learning experiences. And so create is kind of my mantra. And so number 5, try to surround yourself with positive people. And I've had many wonderful mentors along the way when I first started. And that's why I'm involved with the Hidden Branch, because I want to encourage people to try this genealogy profession as a career. But I also see a lot of negativity. And sometimes I see it in the genealogy community where, and even from, old guard genealogists, and I see people being a little more negative instead of being positive. And I don't like to see that fear. Like, I don't want somebody to be afraid to talk to me or ask me questions. I like to consider myself approachable, and I try to be respectful, and I try to be sympathetic and empathetic, because we were all in that position at one point. We were all beginners. We were all starting out. And so I think, look to the leaders, but also look to, accomplishments, just aren't everything. I think you have to look to somebody that can really inspire you and encourage you as well. And, I mean, we really want to do, get all these 5-star reviews. Like, that's what you want as an author or a presenter. You want all the positive, and you really try your best. But the 5-star reviews are a little more of an anomaly than most of the time. Our evaluations or our reviews fall somewhere in the middle. And, every person who's presented or written a book or written an article has at some point received some sort of negative feedback. Even, your biggest stars out there, the people you look up to the most, we've all, because you can't please everybody. And so I have a couple of quotes, and a couple of these are reviews that I've received, and a few were from fellow genealogists, genealogy professionals who let me use them, but I've kept their names off them. But I just want to go through a couple just to show you. So this is one of mine. Love this book, could have been written by me, so many situations I could relate to. So that was a positive review. That's an example of a book I received, a review I received on one of my books. And so these are positive. I attended Roots Tech 2017 and attended your class, really enjoyed it. And I have to say that I've stuck with writing in my online journal nearly every day since the conference. It is one of the few things I took away from the conference and I am still doing. Thank you for your insight. So we all like to receive these feel-good evaluations because they keep us going. We also have the trolls. And sometimes, I always laugh. One of my favorite shows is The Big Bang Theory. And there's an episode in The Big Bang Theory where the lead character, Sheldon Cooper, is playing this game and he's trying to get this troll and he can't get the troll. And so he goes, hit troll with axe, hit troll with axe. And so I always try to put that in my head when I see something that's not a constructive criticism, but it's a mean-spirited comment, or it just has nothing to do with the presentation I gave or the book that I've written or the article that I've written. One of them I received is interesting and seems to be accurate according to my research, but the writer isn't an accomplished writer, so for me, it wasn't worth it. Ouch. Okay, that's your opinion. I obviously didn't write it the way you wanted it. It obviously didn't resonate with you. It hurts, but you learn to move on. This next one is from a colleague of mine who wrote a book, and they shared it with me. Have not had time to read it. Hope it meets my expectations. So somebody was reviewing a book on Amazon that one of my genealogy colleagues wrote, and they hadn't even read the book. So these are the kind of things that will show up. This is one of my favorite from a fellow genealogist who was a presenter at a conference. Her bangs were annoying. Absolutely has nothing to do with the content of the presentation. And then this one actually happened to me at Roots Tech. Completely negative review. She would not let me take pictures of her slides. So these are the kind of things that you might get. And so we all have our ways of dealing with the negativity. I always look to my mom, who was, I was very close with my mom, and she was very inspiring. And she always said to me, do not let people make you feel they are better than you. They may have more money, more opportunity, or more skills, but they are just people. And I try to remember that. And sometimes, it's not really about you. It's about the person that's actually making the comments. It's something that within them that's making them lash out, and you are the target. So you really have to take these things with a grain of salt. And, my husband always told me, for conference evaluations, use the law of statistics, throw out the really, really stellar ones, throw out the really absolute negative ones, and the truth lies somewhere in the middle. So take the constructive criticism, work on things that you can improve in, and ignore the things that are irrelevant. And then we all know fights on social media. So if you're on social media, you know that people can be very mean and very nasty. Their comments, come from a keyboard. They may not necessarily say that same thing to you if they saw you face to face. And social media is full of toxicity, but it's also full of good positivity. So seek out the positive and try to block out the negative, and be selective in what groups you belong to, who you interact with, what social media platforms work for you. You don't have to be on every single one, and you don't have to be engaged all the time. You do what's right for you. I go days without checking my social media, and that's just me, because I have other things that are priorities in my life. So I try to just kind of tune out a lot of the negativity, and it keeps me sane. It keeps me healthy. So that's just another piece of advice. So, and on the flip side, don't be a troll yourself. Always act with kindness, and think about how the other person is feeling or what situation they may be in. Number 6 is it's okay to say no. And I found this for myself where I was doing so many different things with so many different organizations and companies and getting assignments, getting projects. I would pretty much accept anything that I could do within reason, to the detriment actually of my income, because I was putting out more money than I was actually getting in from going to a conference. And I started looking at my spreadsheet, and I finally said to myself, I'm losing money because I have to actually stay extra days at this conference. What is the return on investment? Early in my career, the networking was important, meeting people, getting more assignments. Now I find that the travel for me is more exhausting. So I made a decision post pandemic that I would be more selective in any in-person events that I apply to and that I accept. There has to be something really in it for me. I have to calculate how much work time am I losing by traveling? What is my benefit? What are the potential benefits? And what am I losing? And then I come to a decision. So the online presentations work well for me. I can do an hour presentation and then I'm done. I don't have to travel. I don't have to do anything else. I still earn my money. So everybody has to decide what works for them. I do miss the networking and the in-person uh, interaction, but I think for me, it's just more selective. And so I'm lucky that I'm in a point in my career that I can do this. But it is okay to say no, because you want to avoid burnout. The last thing you want to do is just to hate what you're doing. And for me, I always said genealogy should be fun and doing this should be fun. And if I'm not having fun, I'm not going to be doing this anymore. So you just want to avoid the burnout and take a step back and figure out what's most important to you. Number 7 is to have more than one income stream. And again, while we were during the pandemic, things became a lot more difficult. And so by, having, writing and royalties coming in and online classes and articles and conferences and presentations, I could pretty much see where the cycles were in my income and when things, would be good and when things would slow down. So usually that period between the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, January would be a slow month. And then sometimes in the summer would be a slow month because there wouldn't be a lot of genealogy conferences or things that I could be doing. Now with online opportunities, there's more of an even spread of things that I'm doing and getting paid for. But I think having more than one income stream really let me be able to do, more things, and also have money coming in when one area was slow. I'd have money coming in from something else. So just kind of think about that as a possibility. I remember, my grandfathers were, my maternal grandfather was a coal miner. My then became a steel worker. My paternal grandfather was a steel worker, and they really had no choice. I mean, they stayed with the U.S. Steel Company for 40 some years. I find myself, as the grandchild of an immigrant, thanks to their sacrifices and my education and my abilities, I'm able to make choices for myself. And so I really think that, you have to, break free from what is expected, competing with what has come before to create something new. I mean, you can't do it alone. So, don't get discouraged. Share your ideas with people, find a network that supports you. But, you do have a choice. And I think, especially with technology today, we have a lot of opportunities. So you want to, build your portfolio. Those of you who are starting out, researching, writing, speaking, you may have to do some things for free, but as you start building a reputation and proving that you can, do what you say you're going to do, you'll start getting opportunities, and you will build that portfolio. Number 8 is to try to avoid the perils of perfectionism. And I am a type A personality perfectionist. I get freaked out when I see a typo, and especially if it's something that I've read and editors have read, and then it's still wrong in the final publication. And that used to really upset me. But now I just kind of let it go. And, and I understand that, I'm not perfect. I'm a human being. I do my best. I try my best, but sometimes, it's just not under my control. So you can't let it paralyze you from trying something. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Anne Lamott, who wrote this book, Bird by Bird. And she says, perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor. And so, try to avoid imposing that perfectionism on yourself. My favorite thing that I tell my students in my writing classes is that you can't edit a blank page. So you have to put something out there. So you have to try, and you take your criticisms, you improve the next time, and, you just keep going, you keep writing, you keep researching. And so I always say you can't edit a blank page. If you do something, you have something to work with. And then when some things go wrong, take a moment to be thankful for the many more things that are still going right. And I try to look to my ancestors for inspiration. So my dad was a semi-professional basketball player. He played basketball most of his life from high school up until he was in his late 40s. And so his picture's hanging in the sports museum at the Heinz History Center, Pittsburgh. He has a little card there. And he always would say to me, shoot your best shot. As on the court or in life, you've got to shoot your best shot. Sometimes the shots go in, sometimes they don't, but you got to just take your best shot. And so number 9 is don't give up. And, I want to just kind of read a quick story. King Robert the Bruce was born in 1274, and he was the knight and overlord of Annandale in Scotland. And he was crowned King of Scotland in 1306 and tried to free Scotland from the English enemy. After being defeated at a battle, Bruce escaped and found a hideout in a cave. Hiding in a cave for 3 months, Bruce was at the lowest point of his life. He thought about leaving the country and never coming back. While waiting, he watched a spider building a web in the cave's entrance. The spider fell down time after time, but finally he succeeded with his web. So Bruce decided also to retry his fight and told his men, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. So it's the same thing with genealogy. You got to keep doing that. And I always think, what would my ancestors do? What would my grandparents do? My grandfathers, they came over and never went back to their homeland. They worked in dirty jobs, steel mill, coal mines, but they kept persisting no matter what was thrown in their way. My grandmothers both had strength and will to raise their families in a strange land and never seeing their family again. And these women inspire me, and they inspire me to be the best person I can be. And I really believe that my ancestors have contributed to my success. And so number 10, I challenge you to ask yourself, what else is possible? Think about what else you can do to make yourself a success, and don't limit yourself. And sometimes we say yes, sometimes we say no, sometimes we have maybes, but you want to make sure that you are being true to yourself and thinking of what else is possible. So I want to just give you a bonus, number 11, and that is especially if you're starting out, think about just kind of going the extra mile for something. If you have a passion project, a passion thing that you want to do, especially if you're, proving yourself, spend a little extra time doing the research or writing the queries to write an article or writing a book proposal. Deliver on time. If you have a deadline, meet that deadline. Make sure you're either early on that deadline or you meet that deadline, because people will look to you as the point person. They'll say, hey, she can do this very quickly. I'm going to ask her to write that next article. She's turned it in on time, or she's come through with a presentation. And always be prepared. You might have to fill in for a colleague, or you might have to do something on the fly. So always try to go the extra mile, and you will be rewarded. So I'm going to leave you with that and just say thank you for listening. And I will be back for the Q&A.